I can't resist encouraging any of the students who are interested in coming to Washington to read a wonderful article by David Brooks called The Republic of the Red Line, which he wrote some time ago and still one of the best articles about the living in Washington and the people who work there. So my question is about conservatism and what it means to be a conservative, and specifically why it is that although conservatives talk endlessly about personal freedom as being one of the hallmarks of conservatism, libertarians are such an outlier among the conservative movement. Why are conservatives, and will they change, why are conservatives historically so bad on issues like victimless crime and the use of drugs, an issue in which Bill Buckley was seen as kind of a eccentricity of his, and on gay rights, which Barry Goldwater was good and consistent about? Why is personal freedom so selective among conservatives?
Well, there are conservatives and there are libertarians. And Bill Buckley would say that within every conservative is a streak of libertarianism. And how wide is your streak? And there has long been an interesting debate about drug legalization on the right between more libertarian-style conservatives and more traditional conservatives. There's been about a debate. You use the term gay rights. That's a little slippery. Do you mean gay marriage?
Among other issues.
Okay. There's a debate there, too. I have a feeling there's probably more debate than on the left. But there are these tendencies on the right, and we fight it out. Conservatives are, we're often caricatured as people who want no government. We believe in ordered liberty. Orwell said he admired the law and liberty countries. We're not anarchists, for heaven's sakes. The government is immense. We want to make it work better and be useful and not sluggish and smothering and be on the side of people rather than stifle them. There are very few, I know very, very few pure libertarians, and almost none of them is in politics for good reason. They wouldn't get past square one.
Yeah, I agree with more of that than most of Jay's answers. It's a tension between liberty and social fabric. None of us are really self-made creatures. We inherit the norms, the unconscious understandings, and the habits of people around us. And we rely on those habits. None of us can be good on our own. You rely on the habits of people around you to set certain standards of how to behave. And if you tried to create it on yourself, you'd wind up some sort of monster. And so those habits obviously involve social norms that are beyond the reach of government. But they also involve laws as societies desire to express their priorities for certain things. And so I've long been, for that reason, a conservative for gay marriage. My argument has always been that gay people should not be allowed to marry. They should be socially pressured into marrying. And so we should go up to gays and lesbians and say, are you married yet? You married yet? Are you married yet? Because the idea is the relationship should not be contingent. They should be permanent. And they should be structured by law and by obligation as much as possible. And so I've always been for gay marriage, and I'm glad to see young conservatives are coming along to that line of thought. If I could just add one coda, this is interesting between Jay and I think Jay has expressed more dissatisfaction with the state of American culture. And I do think it's important for all of us in politics and just in general, not only to love America, but to love most of the way Americans actually live. And American music, American students at Yale, believe me, I don't regard Yale as a countercultural institution. The two main drivers of Yale culture among the undergrads, I know I'm going to be cynical here, are not Abby Hoffman or Bernadette Dorn, whose son was here a couple of years ago. They're McKinsey and Goldman Sachs. And so I'm not sure this has become a bastion of the left. And so we live in a meritocratic culture, which has some liberal elements, some conservative elements, some just achievement elements. And I generally love the way Americans live. And I think it's been a problem for conservatives to distance themselves from, not everything obviously, but to distance themselves from the actual life of America while worshiping an abstraction.
Well, let me tell you something. You don't think I'm not going to answer that, do you, Stephen? You were going to another question? Really? After that? Really? Nice. In my life, I've been called a super patriot and a jingo. Love it or leave it. And then I've been called what David has called me. So, aren't you an American? Aren't you proud of the red, white, and blue?
I don't think I quite put it that way.
That's the essence of it. I do love America. I shouldn't have to plead my patriotism here. We shouldn't be in a McCarthyite environment. But I also criticize it. And there's some things I think are wonderful, and I think some things are bad. I'm a liberal. I regard myself as a universalist. I think there are a lot of good things about America, and I'm grateful to have been born here. But I don't think we're the last word on human living, and that we're somehow superior to others because of our citizenship, because of our passport. And through the 8 years of George W. Bush, I looked at a bumper sticker that said, "Dissent is the highest form of patriotism." I'm not sure I'd go that far. But I'm not willing to be read out of the American family, so to speak, just because I think that much of American culture is rotten.
Thanks. I'd like to nudge both of our speakers on the Charles Murray coming apart question a bit more. I come at it this way. I've worked over 20 years as a criminal prosecutor in 3 East Coast cities. And if you look at the biographies, which we get at every sentencing, of every unfortunate young man who commits a crime and goes to jail, there's one issue that predominates vastly over any other. They had no dad, no effective dad growing up. 4 out of 10 children go to bed in America without a daddy. That's the reality tonight and in our time. I understand that you cannot do this by way of Julia and President Obama's ad where you're effectively married to the state. And when we go out there and try to argue for the restoration of the family, we tend to get pigeonholed as we want to bring back Ozzie and Harry to the 1950s and send the women back home, which I think is a ridiculous oversimplification, but that's what we face. David's child, who's growing up analogous to Lincoln on the Plains now, who needs a less impoverished cognitive environment, there's nothing better than 2 parents in the home. I happen to be one who thinks whether they're gay or straight, it's way better than 1 parent. So I like both of our gentlemen to address this because I think this is both a huge crisis, along with the debt, the biggest problem this country faces domestically, and a tremendous opportunity for a political party that's willing to address it in a way that need not come across as discriminatory or stigmatizing. It can save this country.
Okay, I'll go first. First, let me, one quick shot. We're going to keep shooting at each other on this previous question. You said you regard most of American culture as rotten.
I did not.
I wrote down, I'm a reporter. That's what I do for a living.
I certainly regard parts of it as rotten.
Okay,
I think that the country is awash in porn, including advertising, and I think that's bad and corrosive, and I'm not embarrassed by it.
Okay. I'll give you parts are rotten. I guess I think parts are rotten too, but I think smaller parts. I would note that difference between us. The idea that I was reading you out of the American family or calling you McCarthyite is a little bit of an overreaction. Second, on to this question. So I became a conservative after reading a certain Irish philosopher who will remain nameless by covering crime in Chicago. And what you saw is what I saw. And we were alarmed that 32% of African American families were single parent, or were kids were born on single parent. That was 32%. We were shocked. It's now 70. It's now 65 among Latino. It's now 55 among whites with high school education. Among women who give birth under the age of 30, 52% of kids are born out of wedlock. Now, we all know people who grew up in single-parent homes who are wonderful and who are doing great. But the odds are worse. And so this, to me, I agree, is a single biggest problem. Now, how do we get here? We got here for a mix of reasons. 1, cultural decay. 2, little welfare dependency problem. Deindustrialization of jobs. The liberals are right about that. So a mixture of those things. The problem is we can't solve the problem by just reversing the causes of it. And we now have a laissez-faire strategy, which is just leading to further decline. So I am skeptical of most government programs about this, but I don't think we can do nothing. So I would throw in a bunch of programs which have been reasonably well tested to do some good. How much good? I don't know. Some of it would just be better policing. Some of it would be nurse-family partnerships, which go into the homes and teach moms how to be better moms. There's strong evidence that works. Some of it would be early childhood programs concentrated on those from disorganized neighborhoods. Jim Heckman, a University of Chicago economist, pretty conservative guy, strongly supports that, and so do I. Some of it would be mentoring programs. Some of it would be charter schools. Some would be boys and girls clubs. Some of it would be Harlem children's zones spread around the country as much as possible. Basically, we take kids growing up in these destructured atmospheres, we surround them with as many structures as possible. And because we're Burkean, we don't really know what'll work. But if we can surround them with as many social webs as possible, maybe the interaction of those webs will have a positive effect. And that does require a degree of activism, and that's why I'm for a government that, marching forward, spends, frankly, more on discretionary spending on these problems and less on entitlement spending for the elderly.
Well, I have very little to add to that or to what the questioner said, except to note this. David said, we need to do more. We need to do something. And it's an interesting question what we mean by we. The federal government, state governments, little platoons, individuals, churches. What do you mean we? Often when people say we, they mean not just government, but the federal government. And I think the answer, as David indicated, has to be all of the above. This is a very hard problem to tackle, this issue of fatherlessness. It's a cultural and moral issue. This country is in dire economic straits with a $17 trillion debt. At the same time, I don't think our gravest problems are economic. I think they're more of a spiritual nature. And this is a very difficult thing for government to treat. We can at least not make things worse. But I have, you know how Harry Truman said he longed for a one-handed economist because his people are always saying on one hand, on the other hand, on my third hand, on my fourth hand. I was all for the welfare reform in the mid-1990s. You know, quit subsidizing this behavior. If you want to perpetuate something, fund it. On the other hand, how far do we let them fall? Do we let them operate without a net? I like the idea of what Reagan used to call the safety net. I think that Washington ought to be a safety net of the last resort. The individual can do it fine. Family can do it fine. His church fine. The neighborhood, the city council, the county, the state. And the very last safety net, Washington, D.C.'s. I believe that. I think there ought to be some mixture of help. But at the same time, I wouldn't put too much faith in government based on our experience.